Yes, I've never been in politics before. I had no desire to get involved in politics. I always viewed politics as somewhat shady, I guess you might say. Politicians having to sell themselves to the public. Sometimes I thought they would tell two different people different things that were diametrically opposed in order to get their vote. And I thought, I can't do that. I just got to be honest with folks. So I thought, well, there's no point in running for public office, because with that kind of a philosophy, I didn't think it would be electable. I believe in telling the truth and being straight up with folks. But this opportunity came up, and the circumstance came up which resulted in me getting into the election.
Okay. And you decided to put yourself up as a candidate in this particular situation. Why?
Well, my original candidacy was 2014 election. Of course, at the time too, the recall campaign was just getting started and so on. And so we knew, or my wife and I both knew, that there was a distinct possibility that we'd end up maybe being involved in a recall campaign. Everything was up in the air. Everything was pretty iffy. A lot of people said that it wasn't going to happen, that there was not the support and so on. Well, those people were proven wrong, and subsequently I was able to get enough signatures to get on the recall ballot, and so here we are.
Are you running against Senator Giron? She's, because of her gun control votes? I mean, that's the legislation that prompted the recall. What was, from your perspective, what was wrong with her supporting
Well,
the gun control bills?
well, first and foremost, that was in fact the match that lit the fuse. That's what caused the whole dust up, if you will. But there were other issues that her support, or let me see, there were other issues that I was not particularly happy with her vote on, which I didn't. Which, well, see, this is one of those where I'm going, oh boy, I hope you know they edited it. But anyway, there were other issues that I had big concerns about and that passed up in the legislature that I don't believe are beneficial or good for Pueblo and for this district. Now, to name them would be first and foremost the water bill. The water bill that was passed up there in the legislature, which originated or started off, as far as the Senate was concerned, in the committee that she was in, as well as then subsequently she actually was a first sponsor of that bill. That water bill is terrible for the Arkansas River Basin. It makes it easier for water to come out of the basin and be taken out of the basin and moved up to Aurora specifically. Having done some research on the water bill, having done some research as far as water law in general, I understand that this bill absolutely turns water law on its head, in that people that have a water right now, if somebody wants to take that or gain access to that water right, now it's the person who has the water right who has to prove they are being injured by this request for their water rights, instead of where it was before, the people who were looking for that water right or to purchase it or to get it were the ones that had to prove there was no injury to other parties. And that is absolutely, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Senator Giron did drop her sponsorship of that bill, and she never voted for it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So she didn't support it in any votes, but you falter for having been an original sponsor.
Why, definitely I falter for that.
Let's talk about the gun bills that she did vote for, and what's wrong with requiring a universal background check?
I don't believe background checks, even though they've been in place for a long time, I don't believe that they really make a difference as far as people that are wanting to get a handgun or a weapon of any sort that they're going to, use to harm other people. They're going to get it, whether through illegal means. They'll find a way to get a gun. Period. There was just a deal not too long ago, an incident where there was a burglary down in, as I remember, it was in Rye or Beulah, one of the two. And the sheriff's department ended up chasing that car that was involved in that burglary. It crashed up here on I-25, and what did they find in that? There were like 25 handguns that were strewn about the interstate, and these people didn't go through any background check to get those guns. What did they do? They went to a burglary. They committed a burglary, and that's how they got the guns. And this is my concern about these background checks.
So you think background checks are worthless?
Pretty much. I'll be honest with you. They inconvenience law-abiding citizens who have the ability to and the desire to be law-abiding and use the weapons for their intended purpose, which is safety, which is keeping themselves safe, keeping their families safe. And of course, you have the hunting and so on, but the primary use of a weapon is for law-abiding citizens to keep themselves safe.
Setting a limit on a gun magazine. What's wrong with saying you can't have a clip with more than 15 rounds in it?
It's an arbitrary number that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, because anybody that's involved in especially combat shooters and being in law enforcement, having some experience with shooting, you can drop a magazine and put a new magazine in no time at all. I mean, just seconds, in a split second, actually. And so to say, well, you can only have 5, 10, or whatever rounds in a magazine, if somebody has practiced with a magazine, it doesn't really make a difference. And a person could go in, and if they're intent on committing mayhem, they're going to cause problems with the 5, 10, 15, or whatever round the magazine that they get or they have.
So you wouldn't set any limits on it?
I don't believe that it's really necessary. I mean, that they're being produced by the gun manufacturers, and I think what they've been producing has been shown to be, how would you put it, a product that the public wants to buy, and it's the people that are, again, intent on misusing them that are causing the problem.
Voted for was requiring people obtaining background checks to pay for them themselves. What's so unreasonable about that?
Well, again, this goes back to my belief that when somebody's having to pay for something that they're legally entitled to, that's nothing more than a tax and a fee. I could go back and we could talk about the fees, and I put that in quotes, that were put in place by Governor Ritter for getting automobile license plates. Well, that was a fee. Well, that's nothing more than a tax. That's nothing more than a tax. And once again, as far as a fee to get a background check, well, the fee is resultant of background checks being implemented in the first place. So the government or the state puts in a law that says you have to comply with this certain thing that you have to do in this term background checks, and then they attach a fee to it.
Are there any restrictions that you support on gun ownership?
Not really, because it's our right to have weapons. It's guaranteed in the Constitution. And the thing is, if you really look at cities throughout the country that have the strictest gun control laws, those are the cities that have the highest crime rates. They have the highest murder rates where weapons are involved. You want to look at Chicago. You want to look at Washington. You want to look at Detroit. And until Mayor Giuliani instituted the stop and frisk and got tough that way, New York was right up there with them.
New gun control proposals. It's not anything.
Nothing that I would be interested in, that's for sure.
Is that a view you've always had, even given your years on the police department?
Oh, for sure, for sure. You know, I've seen a lot of things when I was on law enforcement, and you know, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it all comes down to when people misuse tools, they're going to be bad results. Just like cars, when somebody speeds and doesn't, you know, follow the law there, they're going to crash, they're going to kill people. And it's not the tool, it's not the item, it's not the whatever we have, it's how it is being used. And that's the thing too. When we talk about the people that have misused these weapons, and granted they're horrific what they do, and it's terrible, and my heart goes out to the people that were affected by that. But when you really look at how many of these incidents have taken place even over the last 20, 30 years, as compared to the number of people that responsibly use weapons, it's pretty doggone small. And so most people, I'm sure, would say, gosh, why should we punish the whole majority of folks for the actions of a few? And yet, they don't seem to worry about punishing gun owners, the majority, that huge number of gun owners, those millions of people that own guns, for the actions of a few.
Well, is there any sort of legislative role that you see for dealing with things like the Aurora shooting, Sandy Hook?
I think the thing is just to hold people accountable. Use the death penalty. I'm a believer in the death penalty. A lot of people say
don't come out of these shootings alive. They go in intending to die.
A lot of times they do. A lot of times they do. But obviously, John Holmes was not one of them. Or is it John or James?
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Holmes.
You know,
Mr. Holmes was
was
not one of them. So Nathan Dunlap was not one of them. And of course, that was not a mass shooting, but that was a terrible incident as well.
So you don't see any sort of really legislative or public policy or that you can see that's going to address these sorts of catastrophes? They're just
no, because people that are intent on doing mayhem are going to do it, and they're going to find a way to do it, and that is just the bottom line.
You've talked about Senator Giron's support for SB 252, the rural electric.
Yes.
What's your objection there?
Well, there's several objections. First and foremost, I guess, I mean, that's the one most visible, is the cost to the rural electric, or the folks in the rural electric co-ops, who are going to end up with a higher electric bill. I know Senator Giron mentioned 2%, as that's what all was going to, that was the only, or I know Senator Giron mentioned 2% as being the number, gosh, I ain't saying this right. I know Senator Giron mentioned that the rates would only go up 2%, but my research has shown that anything, they can expect anywhere from 10 to 30% rate increase in those rural areas. And with the economy the way it is right now, we can't afford even 2% for that matter. Folks are hurting out there. And again, it hurts the people that can afford it the least. Those folks living in the rural areas, in the poorer areas of the state. And it's not just Pueblo West, but it's also in, like I say, all the rural areas. And I've done some other research on this, and part of the concern about this renewable energy thing is that the renewable energy will, especially the solar generation, is going to be done, the plan is to have the solar generation being done up in the San Luis Valley and stuff. Well, from what I've researched, is that's all fine and good, but there's no infrastructure in place to get that solar energy out of that valley. They were trying to establish a grid. They were trying to get the transmission lines in place so that electricity could be taken out of that valley. And I think it was the Tranchera Ranch, and the environmentalists would have none of it. And so we don't have the infrastructure is not in place to get it out of the valley. So it's putting the cart before the horse.
On the flip side, though, we have a number of Pueblo jobs that are keyed to a federal tax credit on wind power. That there are a lot of energy people who say that artificially drives up power prices as well. Do you support the wind credit for Vestas?
I think that's been in place for far too long. I really do. I think that, and I know that Pueblo benefits from that. But like I told you at the very outset of this interview, I'm going to tell people the truth, and so they know exactly where I stand. And the thing is that the renewables, I don't believe, are at technologically in a place where they make economic sense. And so, just like the electric, the ratepayers are going to have to pay higher rates. And then what are they doing on top of that? By their taxes, they're actually funding renewable energy programs. So they're getting hit on both sides of the spectrum. And the renewable energies as far as wind power too. The problem with wind power is when you really need it, you don't have it. That's the problem with wind power, because electricity has to maintain the 60 hertz capability all times if it's going to work. And that's why coal generation, nuclear generation, and so on is predictable. And it's constant and it's steady, whereas wind energy is not. It's dependent on the wind, and the wind, sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. And when you don't have it, you don't have electricity. And something has to be a backup for that.
Senator Roan likes to point out that she was successful this year in getting $30–40 million in capital construction projects for Southern Colorado institutions, Colorado State University, Pueblo, United State University. If folks elect you, you'll join a minority party up at the State House that won't even be in the budget discussions when those decisions are made. Why should somebody vote for you?
Well, that's a good question. Just because I wouldn't necessarily be in budget discussions or part of let me see, Senator Tapia was the leader of the JBC. Yes, the Joint Budget Committee. Thank you, I appreciate that. Just because I wouldn't be in the Joint Budget Committee, say, to make necessarily key decisions at this point, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be in that position later on as the time goes on in the Senate. So we have to start somewhere. Senator Roan was not always on the Budget Committee herself. She had to be appointed to that position, and so that's just part of the process. Well, I was going to say, and in bringing that up, you make a point, is that I don't disagree with Senator Giron on everything. Obviously, that she's done things, like you say, looking out for capital projects that maybe would benefit this area and so on. So I can't say across the board that I disagree with everything she does. And I have to say this, not only about Senator Giron, but all legislators that go up there. To run for election and to become a legislator, that is a huge sacrifice to people. I can see the part as far as running the election, and I'm having talked to legislators that have served up there. That is a big sacrifice in personal time, personal resources, and just family life and so on. And Senator Giron, I commend her for that. But on the other hand, I disagree with a lot of what she has done as far as supporting bills for here in the
Is there an
in
issue
the
or
state.
two that comes to mind immediately where you would tell, I disagree with her on this, I disagree with her on that?
Well, we've discussed the water, we've discussed the electric. The bills that were passed to that affected businesses, the bill that was passed that allowed employees who've been terminated or let go by a business owner to turn around and sue for punitive damages. That does not help business. My wife and I, we own the Downbeat, and that business is in hiatus right now. It's we had to really cut back on the hours and that for a variety of reasons. But the thing is, if we were to think about reopening it as a viable business, say, using that term, looking at this bill right now, I don't know whether I would want to. And people that are wanting to open a business, if they're concerned that they happen to just let somebody go because they're doing their job well, they're going to get sued for punitive damages. How can that be an incentive for a business owner to get into business? It just isn't. It just isn't at all.
George, last week all the GOP senators in the state Senate sent a letter over to the governor's budget office saying, look, the 2013 salary survey report on state wages is going to come out, and you have inaccurately described Department of Corrections employees as being underpaid. And it said you failed to take into account that private prison employees make a substantially lower salary of about 30%, and they want that corrected. What's your view on that? Do you think DOC employees are overpaid?
Peter, I'll be honest with you. That's a topic that I haven't researched enough to maybe even really comment. The thing is that having been in law enforcement, having been on this side, I think that we should get a fair wage, or they should get a fair wage for what they do. They should get compensated adequately, that's for sure. Having retired from the police department, and I know a lot of people that have come out of the police department and then gone to work for corrections, and I said to myself, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that job. God bless them for what they do, because that's a way difficult job, way difficult. And so that has to be kept in mind when wages are discussed. But like I say again, to be honest with you, I haven't really researched that enough to make a good comment about it.
Do you have any feeling at this time on whether you're supportive of using more private prisons? There's always been that debate in the legislature on whether the state should build their own or let private contractors do it, although we seem to be shrinking all prisons right now.
Well, that is true, and there's always the idea of bringing in the private sector, because a lot of people will say that the private sector can do things in a more efficient and more effective way than the public sector can. So once again, though, that's an issue that I haven't really researched to the point where I'd be comfortable taking a position on.
Okay. Any issues we haven't touched on that you're talking about to voters that you want to mention before we wrap up? We've covered my issues.
Well, yes, and this just came out in the paper. People throw out this red herring, I guess, if you will, about this recall election, and they cite the costs. It's going to affect the budget and so on. And depending on what point in the time frame, this has gone anywhere from 150, 180,000 all the way to 250,000, just depending. But the bottom line is this: that cost, in terms of when you look at it losing your right to petition the government is minuscule. That the cost shouldn't even enter it. We're looking at a basic right to be able to petition a government against petition the government for grievances, and that is a fundamental right. And you can't put a monetary figure on that. People throw out once again that this has to do with differences of opinion. It's over differences of opinion, so that shouldn't apply. But my point is this: if a legislator is not representing the constituents the way those constituents believe that they should be representative, you doggone right that person should be recalled. If I don't represent constituents the way they want me to represent, then recall me, doggone it. The whole thing is we're put up there as representatives of the people. They're our boss. It's just like you. If you're not doing your job well here at the Chieftain, Peter, then you should be fired. I mean, if you're not producing, if you're not doing the job that you should be doing, then you should be subject to being fired. The same as the legislators. They work for the people, and if they don't do the job right, they should be fired. But the interesting point of this is that this recall was put into place by people by laws that voters felt caused an infringement on their rights. They're guaranteed by the Constitution. It's very funny that in Wisconsin, where Governor Scott Walker was brought up for a recall, those issues had nothing to do with constitutional issues. Those issues had nothing to do with the rights of the people. Those were issues that were differences of opinion. But I sure didn't hear anybody jump up and say, this is not right. Or I didn't hear any Democratic politicians jump up and say, oh, that's not something we should do, because those are over just differences of opinion. Nobody said that. So why the double standard here in Colorado that this recall is a terrible thing? It just doesn't fit, and it doesn't make sense.